Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF Is BloodRayne Betrayal. Oh, BloodRayne. You haven't been around for a while, have you? I thought Uwe Boll had buried you completely. And sometimes I wish that he had. Alongside Uwe Boll. Whatever the case, BloodRayne, a long time ago, was a third-person kind of character action game involving a Dampier, or however the hell you want to pronounce it. It's not real, it's okay, I can say whatever I want. And it was pretty fun for the time. It involved a rather busty, half-vampire, half-human kind of thing who slaughtered a bunch of people. I mean, it wasn't very complicated. And along comes BloodRayne Betrayal. This has actually been out for quite a while. I remember playing this almost to completion, in fact, on the PS3. It came out as a sort of competing promotion to the Summer of Arcade that Microsoft does every year on Xbox Live, and it was one of the better games in the bunch. And it's a 2D brawler, essentially. It might remind you a little bit of Shank, and rightfully so. It has its own unique art style, not the same as Shank's, but it's a very interesting take on BloodRayne. Certainly the character looks nothing like you would expect from the other BloodRayne titles. But now it eventually makes its way to PC by a company called Way Forward, who you should know because they're responsible for DuckTales Remastered, also for Double Dragon Neon, which recently came out on PC as well, and a host of other things. I mean, their history goes back quite far. They're working on Shantae, I believe, a new version of that now. So, yeah, they've got a pretty decent pedigree behind them. What's the PC version like? Well, to start with, you can't use a mouse in the menu. Which is like, if I scored, I'd dock half a point for that immediately, and every publisher would hate me for it. But they would rapidly learn to allow mouse control in the damn menus. Okay, so let's go to settings and see what's going on here. Video options, not too many. I should, of course, say that it is a 2D game. In fact, I can even push the resolution very, very high, if I so desire. I won't, for obvious reasons, but I can go all the way up to 4K on this, so it lets you go to whatever resolution you want. It's got borderless as well as full screen and windowed options, which is nice. VSync on or off, I experimented with this because I noticed some really odd artifacts. They weren't tearing per se, it's almost like parts of the background weren't updating at the right speed. It was like some kind of parallax error or something. I can't really describe what it is, but hopefully you'll get to see it in the game, and then I can point it out. With VSync on, I noticed that there was just a little bit of controller delay. That can happen with VSync, unfortunately. So I just turned it off because the majority of the game doesn't have any tearing of any sort. And VSync didn't fix that update problem anyway, so I just kind of ignored that. If you wish to force VSync, of course, you could use your Catalyst or NVIDIA control panel to do that. Aside from that, you have separate sliders for background music and sound effects, as well as a brightness slider there, and that's pretty much about it. Controls, as you can see here, you can rebind them, which is nice. And I've played the entire game so far with the keyboard. Now, bear in mind, I've played this game before, much further on the PS3, and I used the controller, it was fine. I used the keyboard here, and I found it surprisingly, again, fine. I don't actually find a part of this control scheme that doesn't work for me. It's a little bit weird, you know, and without using WASD, you use the cursor keys, and then you use attacks like F, and then V for shooting gun, and things like that, but it works fine. And I've had no problems with the defaults, maybe you will, though. And of course, it supports the controller as well. Okay, let's jump into it and show you exactly what's going on with BloodRayne. This is Chapter 5 here, decent amount of the way into the game. Alright. This is BloodRayne. For some reason, she's in some kind of coffin rocket. I cannot explain that in any way, shape, or form. I don't know why that's there, but it is. So, welcome to BloodRayne, and let's murder some people. Kind of like this. It's not too difficult. The actual game itself is fairly easy to understand in terms of the combo system, because there's basically one button to it, but you combine that with different directions and different conditions. So say I can knock him in the air there, and if I did it right, I could then kick him, I could launch him in another direction, which I keep screwing up. But you get the idea. You can do things like heel stomps, you can do a combat dash, which there is actually no block in this game, so you actually need the combat dash. Ah, there we go. You see what I mean? This is this updating problem I was talking about. It only seems to be in areas where there's these big sort of brick buildings at a particular point in the foreground. It can get really distracting, and this level is particularly bad for it because there's a lot of that. I don't know how to fix that. I tried VSync on, and it didn't fix that issue in any way, and that was particularly stupid, unfortunately. Alright, we'll slash our way through here once again and hopefully not mess it up this time. There we go. So, you can regenerate health pretty much any time by grabbing an enemy once they're stunned and draining them. In fact, it almost gives you an unlimited amount of health. This bit's easy because it's only spawning one enemy at a time for no apparent bloody reason. In multiple enemy fights, it's a little bit more difficult to do the drain, but more often than not, the drain actually gives you some invulnerability frames depending on what attack you're having to deal with. Like, ranged attacks more often than not just kind of ignore you, which is interesting when you do that. That's what I was talking about earlier with the launch there. Outside of that, you know, it's a lot of pressing F. You also have a gun, which does that. You don't have many bullets for it, but it's particularly effective. This is interesting. They do keep spawning. There we go. That seemed to do the trick. Not one of the more interesting fights, I've got to say so far. Let's try not jumping down this pit this time. Honestly, wasn't 100% sure as to whether or not it was a pit. Evidently so. There we go. So the game does have some fairly basic platforming involved in it, which either involves jumping or using a sort of sliding backflip thingy, which I will show you once I've dealt with this nonsense. Some of these fights can be particularly tricky, and really I think the biggest problem with the combat system to start with is that it doesn't actually explain how the sliding dash works and the fact that it gives you invulnerability frames. So, you go through the first few levels like, wow, I keep getting hit by a bunch of stuff. Am I just bad, or, you know, does this game not have a good system for this? Well, it does have a good system for it. It's just not openly clear about what that system actually is. So, you can dash and avoid most attacks as long as you're actually paying attention to it. So, while it may look like a complete and utter cluster, it actually isn't. And you can avoid attacks fairly easily. Kind of like that. You just need to get your timing right. I think this is something that some of the initial reviewers of this game didn't quite understand, because this game actually got some fairly mixed reviews. Some people really liked it, and others said, oh, you know, it's punishingly difficult for no reason. I disagree most of the time, actually. I don't think the game is, in reality, especially in combat, that difficult at all. And there's a number of reasons why I believe that's the case. The first one being... There we go. The first one being that you've basically got almost unlimited health, assuming that you are repeatedly draining enemies, which is easy enough to do. Not only that, but you have these fountains every 2 or so minutes, which will actually give you full health and also count as checkpoints. So, I mean, it's not what I would class as a massively difficult title. As you may have noticed there, I was doing that whole backflipping thing. If anything, the only thing I had some problems with is the platforming. I had problems with it on the PS3 version as well. Once you get into the later levels, there's some pretty intense and fairly horrific platforming that can actually get ridiculously hard. I mean, this stuff is fiddly enough as it is, and frankly is not something that I enjoy too much. Oh, I can just do an air dash. What am I thinking of here? See, I keep forgetting about the dash move, and it ends up putting me in situations where I could very easily get past if only I used my sodding brain. Pretty sure something's going to spawn out of that. So I'll just dash through. That should do the trick. There we go. So the platforming is probably the weakest component of the game, honestly. It works fine, but the flip, which involves pushing forward and then pushing in the opposite direction while hitting jump, can be a little bit tricky to master. I don't think there's anything wrong with it per se. It seems to work fine on keyboard. I've not run into situations where it doesn't work. You know, I can see I can execute it pretty reliably here without any problems. But some people might struggle with it initially. And let's be honest, you know, the platforming is not the strong point of the game. I don't mind the going through obstacles while fighting stuff, that's fine. It's just the pure platforming sections that annoy me. There aren't too many of those at the beginning, but later on in the game, there's some parts of the level where the platforming involves doing these heel stomps over enemies over and over again. If you screw one of them up, you fall to your death and have to do it again. That's pretty annoying. If you're gonna call anything old school difficulty when it comes to this game, it's that level of platforming. That's almost like Ninja Gaiden level of silliness going on there. There's not a huge amount of it, but if you are frustrated by that kind of thing, you will probably find that later on it's gonna bother you. There's some pretty mean stuff in here as well. There we go. But, you know, a little bit of practice and you'll be just fine. And honestly, there's so many checkpoints, I don't see how it really matters. It's easy enough to do. Now, the game does rate you after every level, and I usually get an F. So, while you might be able to beat the game is gonna happily tell you that you absolutely suck. I believe they call it worm chow is F. So there you go. You can also do jumps off the side there. So, is the game any good? Well, actually, yeah, it is. And I enjoyed it a lot on the PS3, and I'm enjoying it on PC here as well. I mean, there's no real difference. If I recall correctly, it ran at 60 frames per second on the PS3 as well, although I do believe you can get slightly higher resolutions here. I assume I jump on top of that and don't take damage. Good, okay. I wasn't 100% sure there for a second. Alright. Guess that's not massively difficult. We'll have that. Thank you very much. There we go. So, the PC version isn't much of an improvement, but it is $10. I believe the original version on PS3 was actually $15, so it's a little bit cheaper, and it runs fine with the keyboard. You know, it is not a game that you can't play with the keyboard. In fact, you very much can. It works just fine. I've not encountered a single problem up to this point with using the keyboard when it comes to this game. So, I know. Some people have complained about the number of enemies it throws at you, but as I said, it doesn't really matter how much damage you take if you can very reliably just drain back up to full health over and over again, and really, the combat dash allows you to avoid most attacks. So, it isn't that difficult to stay safe, as demonstrated. But it's reasonably challenging, and it has some old-school elements to it. You know, the idea that you have to explore the level for maximum treasure in order to get the best rating, which involves a lot of wall jumping, and also some combat jumping on enemies to get some of the secrets, which, if you've killed the enemies, you can't do it anymore, so it's fairly unforgiving in terms of giving you the maximum rating, but frankly, I am entirely okay with it doing that, and that seems like a reasonable compromise. You can get through the levels without too much of a problem, but if you want to do it really, really well, then you need to be aware of your surroundings, you need to nail those jumps. That's just evil. Thankfully, they put a save point right before it, so, you know, it's not too shabby. I should be able to figure this one out after that, then. Or maybe not. Okay, I think I have to jump as it's falling. This could be tough. Nah. Not at all. Shouldn't have said that! I knew it was coming! So, what about the combat? Well, I like the combat. Son of a... But it is a bit simplistic. You know, it is mostly about hammering F, yeah? You've got a couple of other buttons. You've got the drain button, which involves a stun. Then you've got a G button, which is a taunt, but also detonates an infected enemy. So what I actually mean by that is that when you drain an enemy, but you don't drain him completely, you infect him, kind of with your Dampier virus, and then you can detonate him, which makes him explode, which is an extremely effective way of clearing out large amounts of enemies. And it's fairly reliable, too, so... Oh my god, why? It's a good way of blowing up a bunch of stuff. And outside of that, though, most of the combat is done with one button and various combinations of that button with different kinds of movement. So, you know, if you press up and F, that's a juggle, but then if you press up and F and then in mid-air, you go right and F, you actually kick them, which is useful for kicking enemies into hazards and things like that. So there's a little bit more depth than what initially appears to be there, and the combos are fairly easy to learn. What I do like is the fact that the animation quality makes the combos look and feel rather fantastic. Yes! Ah, excellent. I beat the pit boss. Wonderful. That was funny for 2 reasons. Or maybe 0. Alright, let's play Slicey Slicey with this fellow. Ah, yes, now it's telling me how to do this. I would love to show you. Absolutely love to show you. So, yeah! That's actually a lot of fun, I gotta admit. That's a lot of fun. And extremely effective, and apparently it's now teaching me how to do it, even though I learned it several levels ago, just because it's required in terms of the environment, which, that was fine. That's a decent way of teaching people, I feel. Come on. Come on, you. Oh, I guess I'd have to launch him up there. Wow, okay. That's unforgiving. Ah. I guess it's gonna require me to keep doing that. There we go. And now I can drain him and blow him up. As long as I stun him first. Sweet. That's what we like to see. So, while it might seem fairly simplistic, the combat is extremely enjoyable, and I've gotta say, the art style is pretty damn good. It's only really... Oh, bloody hell. Oh, come on, I just fought this bloody thing. Oh, man. I just fought this last level, and it's an infuriating boss, so this'll be amusing. By which I mean, God, why? Oh my... jeez. Yeah, I can see exactly what it's going to require me to do here as well. Grab an enemy, Blow it up. Ah. My god, why? The game definitely has its difficulty spikes. I'll give it credit for that. I can't hit any of these things because I haven't blown the rocks off it. So that's lovely. And we just have to try and avoid damage until that happens. Although you can just grab these parasites out of the air. Come on! I haven't managed to stun them well enough yet. It's not like we... Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. Jeez. That was unnecessarily silly. It's a good-looking game, and it plays well, too. For the most part. Except for, you know, the boss fights generally are fairly frustrating, I've got to say. This one in particular was a bit of a nightmare, because it's fiddly to get those particular enemies stunned in order to break the rock so you can actually attack this thing's pincers. So, it's a bit evil, a bit frustrating, and there are those moments there of almost old-school level of difficulty where you're thinking, oh god, why? But at the end of the day, it's generous with its checkpoints, and it's also generous with its health. So... Oh, and apparently you only need to hit one of them. It better not regrow them. It's going to regrow them, isn't it? I bet it's going to regrow them. Oh, actually, I've almost killed it, so never mind. Slash it up, slash it up. Do a little bit more damage. There we go. Almost beaten this thing. So it wasn't actually that hard, I just messed it up completely. But, certainly every now and again, there's a bit that will just make you scratch your head and say, whoa, that was excessively difficult. And I might lose anyway. Ah, bollocks. But regardless, it's still a very fun side-scroller. It's got some fantastic combat, really great art style. Barely any story to speak of, but personally, I don't really care about that. It takes about 8 hours to beat, give or take. There's a good amount of secrets to find, and frankly, I just find the game really, really satisfying to play. And you know I like things like Shank, so this shouldn't really surprise you too much. I like the side-scrolling brawler genre a lot. And I think that this game, outside of some of the more finicky platforming, executes it pretty damn well. I still would love to try and figure out what exactly is causing that kind of screen-tearing style issue. I'd love to know what that's all about, and I'd love to know how to actually fix it, because I find it very annoying. And the PC port is not brilliant, although it's serviceable. It's decent enough, you know? It has the resolution options, it has the windowed mode, it has the rebindable keys, and it actually works just fine with the keyboard. So, that's nice. Oh, come on! Come on! Just stun him! Ah, that took enough bloody effort. I need to drain one of these quickly, but I have a feeling I'm gonna fail this again. Oh, why me? BloodRayne Betrayal, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty damn fun. It is a good side-scrolling brawler if that is what you are looking for, which every now and again I most assuredly am, and this is a good option for it. Just bear in mind you will encounter the occasional element of frustration. But, for the most part, the game's fair. And I'm totally fine with that. BloodRayne Betrayal, available for $10 or your regional equivalent on Steam. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. And I'll see you next time.